It was a cool spring evening in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, on April 22, 2006. The quiet suburban streets glowed in the fading light, street lamps flickering on one by one. Families were winding down, children tucked into bed, and the neighborhood hummed with the ordinary stillness of a Saturday night. But inside one house on a quiet cul-de-sac, horror was about to unfold. At 1 a.m., the Richardson home, a modest two-story family house, looked perfectly peaceful from the outside. But behind the drawn blinds, a storm of violence was tearing it apart. Upstairs, Marc and Debra Richardson, loving parents of 2 children, were being brutally attacked in their own home. Down the hall, their 8-year-old son Jacob, a boy who loved cartoons and superheroes, lay sleeping, unaware that death was creeping toward him. And at the center of it all was someone no one would have ever suspected, their own 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine. Marc Richardson was a hard-working father. At 42 years old, he carried himself with quiet strength, known in the neighborhood for his easy smile and willingness to help anyone who needed it. He loved the outdoors, hockey, and above all, his children. Debra, 48, was warm, nurturing, and deeply protective of her kids. She was the kind of mom who made sure homework was done, dinners were warm, and holidays were celebrated with joy. Her friends described her as the heart of the family. And then there were the kids. Jasmine Richardson, 12 years old, a bubbly girl who had always been bright, sociable, and eager to please. She was in 7th grade and until recently had been described as cheerful and loving toward her family. Jacob Richardson, only 8, a sweet boy who adored his big sister. He was playful, energetic, and still slept with stuffed animals at night. To neighbors, they were an ordinary, happy family, the kind of family you'd wave to on your way to work, the kind of family you'd never imagine would end in tragedy. But something was happening to Jasmine beneath the surface. Just a year before the murders, Jasmine was like most other preteens. She loved dolls, makeup, and hanging out with friends at the mall. She wore colorful clothes, laughed easily, and had a close bond with her mom. But by the time she turned 12, Jasmine had begun to change. She discovered online chat rooms and social networking sites like vampirefreaks.com, a gothic subculture hub filled with teenagers and young adults who dressed in black, posted dark poetry, and romanticized vampires and death. On her profile, Jasmine reinvented herself. She adopted a new persona, heavy eyeliner, fishnet gloves, dark clothes, and a tagline that read, "Welcome to my tragic end." She told people she was 15 or 16, far older than her real age. And in those online spaces, she met someone who would forever alter the course of her life. Jeremy Steinke, the werewolf. Enter Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was 23 years old, but mentally and emotionally he seemed trapped in a twisted adolescent fantasy. He dressed in trench coats and dark makeup, called himself a 300-year-old werewolf, and claimed he wore a vial of blood around his neck. He and Jasmine met through friends and soon began communicating online. What started as flirtation quickly spiraled into obsession. Jeremy was instantly drawn to Jasmine's youth, her rebellion, and her eagerness to escape her parents' rules. And Jasmine, caught between childhood and adolescence, saw Jeremy as the exciting, dangerous figure she craved. They began referring to each other as soulmates. Jasmine posted dramatic declarations online. "I would do anything for my boyfriend. I would die for him." But soon those posts took on a darker edge. Marc and Debra noticed the changes in their daughter almost immediately. Her once bright clothes were replaced with all black. Her grades slipped. She snuck out late at night and began arguing with her parents constantly. When they discovered her relationship with Jeremy, a man nearly twice her age, they were horrified. They forbade her from seeing him, grounding her and restricting her online activity. But for Jasmine, this only deepened her resolve. To her, Jeremy wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the key to a new life, a life without rules, without parents, without the suffocating structure of childhood. And together, the young girl and the disturbed man began entertaining a fantasy that would turn deadly. Online chats between Jasmine and Jeremy would later be revealed in court, exposing their chilling descent. Jeremy wrote, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." Instead of recoiling, Jasmine encouraged it. On her profile, she posted dramatic poetry about blood and death. In one exchange, she even described the idea of murdering her parents as a romantic act that would free her to be with Jeremy forever. The two lovers fantasized about running away together after the murders, living a life of freedom. And on April 22, 2006, those fantasies turned into reality, the night of the murders. At around 1 a.m., Jeremy Steinke entered the Richardson home. He carried a knife. Marc and Debra were asleep upstairs. Jacob was in his bed. Jasmine's role that night remains debated. Some say she encouraged Jeremy, others believe she actively participated. But one fact is undeniable. She did nothing to stop it. Jeremy first encountered Marc. A violent struggle broke out. Marc fought desperately to protect his family, but Jeremy stabbed him repeatedly until he collapsed near the top of the stairs. Debra was next. She screamed, pleaded, but Jeremy silenced her with brutal force. Then came Jacob. The 8-year-old woke up in the chaos, terrified. He begged for his life. Witnesses later said Jasmine herself may have been the one who held him down, or even stabbed him. At the very least, she admitted to being present, watching, as her little brother was killed. Within minutes, the Richardson home was silent. Marc, Debra, and Jacob lay dead. The only surviving member of the household was the one who helped orchestrate it, Jasmine, a Sunday morning in Medicine Hat. The morning of April 23, 2006, was cool and calm in Medicine Hat. Families stirred awake, church bells chimed faintly in the distance, and the neighborhood seemed wrapped in weekend peace. But at the Richardson home, the blinds stayed drawn. No one stepped out to collect the paper. No car pulled from the driveway. By mid-morning, neighbors began to sense that something wasn't right. One of them, a young boy who was Jacob's friend, came knocking. He wanted to play. Normally, Jacob would have bounded to the door, eager to join him. This time, there was no answer. The boy knocked again. Still nothing. Puzzled, he went home and told his mother, who quickly grew concerned. She knew the Richardsons. They weren't the type to ignore knocks at the door. Something felt wrong. A neighbor finally decided to look closer. Peering through a basement window, they froze in horror. There, on the floor inside the house, was the lifeless body of a man, Marc Richardson. Blood pooled around him. The neighbor stumbled back, heart racing, before dialing 911. "Something's wrong. I think there's been a murder." When officers from the Medicine Hat Police Service arrived, the neighborhood buzzed with flashing lights and worried whispers. Guns drawn, they forced their way into the house. The scene inside was one of pure carnage. Marc Richardson lay near the staircase, stabbed multiple times. Debra was found nearby, her body marked by the same brutal violence. Upstairs, in his small bedroom, they found Jacob Richardson, just 8 years old. He had been stabbed repeatedly. The officers, hardened by years of service, stood stunned. Entire families weren't supposed to be wiped out like this. Not here. Not in quiet Medicine Hat. Where was Jasmine? As they cleared the house, one chilling realization set in. There were 3 bodies. But the Richardsons had 4 family members. 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson was missing. At first, panic swept the investigation. Perhaps she had been kidnapped. Perhaps whoever had slaughtered her family had taken her. The police quickly issued an Amber Alert. Descriptions of Jasmine spread through radio stations, television broadcasts, and newspapers. Her face, young, innocent, framed by dark hair, was suddenly everywhere. The public was told to be on the lookout. But behind closed doors, detectives were already entertaining another theory. What if Jasmine wasn't a victim at all? As investigators combed through the house, they found no signs of forced entry. Whoever had come inside that night had been let in, or had already been there. Even more unsettling, they noticed Jasmine's room. Posters of goth bands covered the walls. Online printouts from a site called vampirefreaks.com lay scattered on her desk. Some pages were filled with poetry about death, blood, and love everlasting. Her computer became the first piece of evidence seized. When detectives started scrolling through Jasmine's online activity, they were stunned. Jasmine's Vampire Freaks profile painted a picture far darker than her age suggested. She claimed to be 15 or 16. She dressed in gothic attire, wore heavy eyeliner, and posted dramatic declarations of love for her 23-year-old boyfriend, Jeremy Steinke. The two had exchanged hundreds of messages, many of them violent. One read, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." And Jasmine's reply, "I love this plan. It's so romantic." The words chilled investigators. This wasn't a girl who had been kidnapped. This was a girl who might have helped orchestrate her own family's murder. As word spread, Medicine Hat was thrown into chaos. Parents pulled their children inside, locking doors. Reporters swarmed the quiet neighborhood, broadcasting grim details across Canada. At first, many clung to the belief that Jasmine was a victim. A 12-year-old girl couldn't possibly be part of something so horrific. But whispers spread quickly. About the older boyfriend, about Jasmine's gothic persona, about the plan. Soon, the community was asking the same question police were asking. Was Jasmine Richardson missing, or was she running? Police knew they had to act fast. Jasmine and Jeremy could be anywhere. Officers checked bus stations, interviewed friends, and traced the pair's online conversations. Leads began trickling in. Witnesses had seen Jasmine with Jeremy the night before. Others reported spotting them together the following morning. The image of the couple began to form. Two young lovers on the run, bonded not just by obsession, but by blood. While investigators raced against time, Elizabeth's family, Patricia and other relatives, began grappling with their grief. 3 lives had been stolen in a single night, and the only surviving daughter was gone. For them, hope was a fragile thread. They prayed Jasmine was safe, a hostage, a victim. But with every passing hour, evidence suggested otherwise. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was a fugitive love story drenched in murder. By April 24th, less than 48 hours after the murders, a tip came in. Someone had spotted Jasmine and Jeremy together, laughing, seemingly unconcerned, at a restaurant in a nearby town. Police mobilized immediately. What began as a search for a missing child was about to end with the capture of Canada's youngest killer in modern history. While Medicine Hat reeled from the slaughter inside the Richardson home, Jasmine and Jeremy were already miles away. The two had fled the neighborhood shortly after the killings, clutching each other's hands like star-crossed lovers in some twisted fairy tale. They weren't hiding in terror. They were basking in the chaos they had created. They hopped between friends' houses, lied about where they'd been, and even bragged openly about the murders. Witnesses later recalled hearing Jeremy boast, "We killed her parents. We slaughtered them like pigs." And Jasmine? She stood beside him, smiling. It was as though the gravity of what they had done hadn't settled in. Or worse, it had, and they loved it. Back at police headquarters, investigators were piecing together the lovers' movements. Jasmine's online accounts were a treasure trove of evidence. On vampirefreaks.com, her profile featured dramatic captions about eternal love and forever together. Jeremy, calling himself a 300-year-old werewolf, declared that nothing would keep them apart. Detectives traced recent chat logs between the two. In them, Jasmine raged against her parents, who had forbidden her from seeing Jeremy. Jeremy promised they would be together. no matter the cost. The chats were filled with phrases that now read like foreshadowing, "We need to get rid of them. I'll do anything for you. Death is the only way." The evidence was damning. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was premeditated murder. As police worked around the clock, Medicine Hat residents lived in dread. The image of Jasmine, once an innocent 12-year-old neighbor, now haunted them. Parents looked at their own children differently. Could a kid really murder her family? Could darkness like that grow unnoticed under a parent's roof? The local media amplified the fear, splashing Jasmine's picture across front pages. "Missing girl or murder suspect?" the headlines asked. The town, once quiet and trusting, was now gripped by suspicion. On April 24th, just 2 days after the murders, the breakthrough came. Police received a tip. A group of teenagers had spotted Jasmine and Jeremy in the nearby town of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 130 kilometers away. The teens weren't hiding. In fact, they had been boasting about their crime. One witness recalled Jeremy declaring, "Me and my girlfriend killed her family so we could be together." Another remembered Jasmine giggling as Jeremy described the murders. The arrogance of their confession sealed their fate. That evening, police moved in. Officers surrounded a small truck parked outside a house where the couple had been staying with friends. Inside the vehicle sat Jeremy Steinke and Jasmine Richardson. The girl looked impossibly young, barely more than a child. Jeremy, with his heavy eyeliner, spiked hair, and goth clothing, looked like a caricature of rebellion. As officers pulled them out, neither resisted. They were calm, almost indifferent. When asked if they knew why they were being arrested, Jeremy smirked. "Because we killed her family." Jasmine stayed silent, her dark eyes fixed on the ground. Shockwaves. News of the arrests tore through Medicine Hat like wildfire. The missing child everyone had been praying for wasn't a victim after all. She was a suspect, a killer. Neighbors wept openly in the streets. Teachers who had once taught Jasmine in class struggled to comprehend it. The story dominated national headlines. Commentators described it as Canada's most shocking child crime in modern history. The idea that a 12-year-old girl, still in middle school, still watching cartoons and passing notes in class, could conspire to murder her own parents and brother shattered the nation's sense of innocence. At the police station, Jeremy and Jasmine were separated and questioned. Jeremy bragged again about the murders, telling detectives he had done it for love. He insisted he and Jasmine were like Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers whose parents tried to tear them apart. But unlike Shakespeare's play, this tragedy wasn't about two families feuding. It was about one family slaughtered by the child they trusted most. Jasmine at first played innocent. She claimed she had nothing to do with the killings. But when confronted with the chat logs, the evidence from her computer and Jeremy's own statements, her facade began to crack. She admitted she had talked about killing her parents. She admitted she wanted to be with Jeremy no matter what. But she insisted she hadn't actually carried out the stabbings. Detectives weren't buying it. The community tries to understand. As the days passed, Medicine Hat held vigils for Marc, Debra, and Jacob. Candles lit up the streets. Flowers and stuffed animals piled outside the family home. But beneath the grief lay a disturbing undercurrent of anger. How could Jasmine do this? Some blamed Jeremy, the older boyfriend who had manipulated her. Others whispered that Jasmine herself was evil, beyond saving. The town was divided. But one thing was clear. Justice had to be served. The arrests of Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke sent shockwaves across Canada. But the real storm was only beginning. As prosecutors prepared their case, one factor overshadowed everything else: Jasmine's age. She was just 12 years old at the time of the murders, far below the age at which most people could even fathom committing such atrocities. Canadian law dictated that minors under the age of 14 could not be tried as adults for first-degree murder. The absolute maximum sentence she could face, no matter how heinous her crime, was 10 years in custody and community supervision. This reality horrified many. 3 lives had been taken, and yet, in less than a decade, Jasmine could walk free. As media outlets flooded with coverage, the nation debated fiercely. Some argued Jasmine was a victim of manipulation, a child groomed by a much older man. Jeremy, 23 at the time, was accused of exploiting her youth and vulnerability, pulling her into his dark fantasy world. Others insisted Jasmine bore equal responsibility. She wasn't a passive follower, they argued. The online chats proved she had fantasized about the killings, encouraged them, even helped plan them. In the court of public opinion, Jasmine was either a lost little girl led astray or a cold-blooded child killer. Jeremy's trial came first. Prosecutors painted him as a dangerous predator. They displayed his vampire freak's profile to the jury, where he described himself as a lichen, a werewolf centuries old who craved blood. His online posts were filled with violent imagery and declarations of eternal love for Jasmine. The jury was shown his confessions, to police, to friends, even to strangers he bragged to after the murders. He had admitted again and again that he had stabbed Jasmine's parents to death. The most chilling detail? Jeremy claimed it was an act of love, comparing himself and Jasmine to Romeo and Juliet. But instead of dying for love, they had decided to kill for it. When the verdict came, there was no hesitation. Guilty. Jeremy Steinke was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 life sentences, with no chance of parole for 25 years. Jasmine's turn. Jasmine's trial began in July 2007. From the start, her youth was impossible to ignore. She looked small, almost fragile, as she sat in the courtroom. To many observers, she resembled a child waiting for school to start, not someone accused of slaughtering her own family. But the evidence against her was damning. Prosecutors laid out Jasmine's online communications with Jeremy. The jury read her messages aloud. "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." They read her dark poetry, describing blood, death, and hatred toward her parents. They heard how, on the night of the murders, she had allegedly encouraged Jeremy, telling him killing her family was the only way they could be together. And they learned that while Jeremy stabbed Marc and Debra downstairs, Jasmine went upstairs and killed her own brother, Jacob, an 8-year-old boy. The courtroom fell silent as this detail was revealed. Jasmine's lawyers argued she had been manipulated. Jeremy was 23, nearly twice her age. He had inserted himself into her life, isolated her from her parents, and preyed on her desire for independence. They claimed she was a confused, vulnerable child, swept up in a fantasy she didn't fully understand. They insisted she hadn't actually committed the stabbings, or if she had been pressured, brainwashed into believing it was the only option. But the prosecution hammered back. Jasmine wasn't innocent. She had plotted. She had participated. She had smiled afterward, giddy at the thought of being free from her family. Friends and acquaintances of Jasmine and Jeremy testified. They recounted conversations where the couple openly talked about killing her parents. One recalled Jeremy saying, "It's her family or me, and she's choosing me." Another remembered Jasmine herself joking about killing her brother because he was in the way. Each testimony painted a chilling picture. This wasn't a crime of sudden rage. It was deliberate, premeditated, and disturbingly romanticized. On July 9, 2007, after weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its decision. Jasmine Richardson was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. At just 13 years old, she became the youngest person in Canadian history ever convicted of multiple homicides. Her sentence, the maximum under Canadian youth law, 6 years in custody in a psychiatric facility, followed by 4 years under community supervision. 10 years in total, that was it. the verdict drew outrage from many. How could 3 lives be worth only 10 years? How could someone capable of such darkness be rehabilitated in so short a time? But others argued the law had no choice. Jasmine was a child. Her brain was still developing. And if there was any hope of rehabilitation, Canada's justice system was designed to provide it. For the families of Marc, Debra, and Jacob, there was no real justice. Nothing could bring them back. And for the community of Medicine Hat, the wounds would never fully heal. When the judge's gavel fell and Jasmine Richardson was sentenced, the reality of her punishment set in. She would not be shipped off to an adult prison like Jeremy. Instead, she was sent to a secure psychiatric facility for young offenders. There, the focus was not purely on punishment. Instead, it was on treatment, rehabilitation, and reintegration. To many outsiders, it seemed unthinkable. How could someone who had murdered her entire family be given therapy instead of life imprisonment? But Canada's youth justice system was built on a different philosophy. Children could change. Inside the facility, Jasmine's days were structured. Therapy sessions, education, psychological evaluations, and carefully monitored social interactions filled her time. Her identity as the 12-year-old killer followed her everywhere. Other young offenders looked at her with a mix of fear and curiosity. Staff members were cautious, but also determined. Their mission wasn't just to keep Jasmine contained, it was to figure out whether she could ever be safe to release. Jasmine underwent intensive therapy. Psychologists focused on her immaturity, her susceptibility to manipulation, and her inability to fully grasp consequences at the time of the murders. She was diagnosed with traits of conduct disorder and borderline personality tendencies. But she also showed signs of responsiveness to treatment, a willingness to reflect, to express remorse, and to engage with therapy. She began to write letters to therapists, to counselors, and even to surviving relatives, letters filled with apologies, guilt, and the haunting acknowledgement of what she had done. Meanwhile, Jeremy Steinke was serving his life sentence in an adult prison. Unlike Jasmine, there was little focus on his rehabilitation. At 23, the court saw him as fully responsible for his actions. Reports described him as unrepentant. He continued to style himself as a vampire, embracing the dark persona that had drawn Jasmine to him in the first place. The stark difference between their fates fueled even more public debate. Back in Medicine Hat, Alberta, the Richardson home sat empty. For a long time, no one wanted to go near it. The once cheerful house filled with laughter and family life had become a monument to horror. Neighbors avoided driving past. Children whispered ghost stories about it. Adults spoke of it only in hushed tones. The murders had shattered the town's sense of security. Parents who once trusted their kids to wander freely now watched them with hawk-like vigilance. Medicine Hat would never be the same. Across Canada, Jasmine's case became a lightning rod for discussions about the Youth Criminal Justice Act. Was 10 years enough for someone who had planned and carried out a triple homicide? Supporters of the system argued that Jasmine had been a child, manipulated by an adult predator. If there was any chance she could be rehabilitated, society had a duty to try. Critics countered that some crimes were too severe to forgive, no matter the age of the perpetrator. They feared Jasmine could one day reoffend, her violent impulses hidden beneath a veneer of rehabilitation. The years pass. As the years ticked by, Jasmine continued to make progress in therapy. Reports from staff described her as cooperative, reflective, and increasingly mature. She completed her schooling. She participated in community-based programs under supervision. Step by step, she worked toward the day she would walk free. All the while, the families of Marc, Debra, and Jacob lived with an unending grief. For them, the countdown to Jasmine's release wasn't a sign of rehabilitation. It was a ticking clock, a reminder that the person who destroyed their lives would soon walk among them again. Release. In 2011, Jasmine completed the custodial portion of her sentence and began the community supervision phase. This meant she was allowed to live in society, but under strict conditions: curfews, mandatory therapy sessions, constant monitoring. Finally, in 2016, the full 10 years had passed. Jasmine Richardson was officially free. She had served her entire sentence. She was just 22 years old. By the time of her release, Jasmine was unrecognizable from the 12-year-old girl who had once posted dark fantasies online. She had changed her name. She had cut ties with Jeremy, who remained behind bars. She had built a new identity, one shielded from the media, designed to give her the chance at a second life. Court reports indicated that she no longer posed a risk to society. But whether the public believed that was another story. To this day, the Jasmine Richardson case remains one of the most controversial in Canadian criminal history. Was she a victim? A child manipulated by a predator? Or was she a willing participant? A calculating killer who used her age as a shield against harsher punishment? The truth may lie somewhere in between. For the families of Marc, Debra, and Jacob Richardson, there is no release. Their lives ended brutally in 2006. For Medicine Hat, the scars remain. The case is a reminder of how darkness can fester even in the most ordinary places. A quiet suburban home, a small-town neighborhood, a child's bedroom. And for the world, the story of Jasmine Richardson is a haunting paradox. A 12-year-old who loved cartoons and stuffed animals. A 12-year-old who murdered her family. Tell us your thought in the comments section. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here at True Crime C8D, we tell the stories you'll never forget.